I want you to deeply imagine a cold, heavily raining afternoon exactly 10 years ago. Two young men are sitting across from each other in a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop in the heart of the city. Both of these men are incredibly intelligent, both are exceptionally hardworking, and both have managed to save a very respectable amount of money from years of grueling, exhausting corporate labor. They share the exact same starting line in the marathon of life. They both clearly recognize that the global economy is rapidly and fundamentally changing, and they both make a firm, conscious decision to invest their hard-earned life savings to deeply protect their families from the terrifying unknown future. They both read the exact same financial news, they both listen to the exact same popular analysts on television, and they both believe they are making the right choices. Today, exactly 10 long years later, they happen to cross paths and meet again at that very same coffee shop, but their current realities could not possibly be more drastically, painfully different. One of them is completely and utterly exhausted. He looks 10 or 15 years older than he actually is. His posture is defeated. He is constantly stressed, endlessly watching his retirement portfolio bleed out day after day on his phone screen, and he is completely trapped in a vicious, unbreakable cycle of financial anxiety. He is working much longer and much harder hours today just to afford the exact same basic groceries, the exact same electricity bills, and the exact same housing costs that he easily paid for a full decade ago. He feels like he is running on a treadmill that is constantly speeding up, and no matter how fast he runs, he is slowly falling backward. The other man sitting calmly across the table is completely relaxed, deeply at peace, and radiating absolute confidence. He has achieved total and unquestionable financial freedom. His personal wealth has compounded massively over the last 10 years, scaling to heights he never thought mathematically possible. He travels the world with his family, he sleeps deeply at night, and he lives without a single ounce of worry about rampant inflation, terrifying stock market crashes, or shifting geopolitical conflicts. He controls his own time, which is the ultimate definition of true wealth. What exactly created such a massive, terrifying difference between these two identical human beings over a single decade? Was it purely blind luck? Was it illegal insider trading? Was it some secret inheritance? Or was it simply that one person truly understood the massive, invisible financial game being played behind the heavily guarded doors of central banks and Wall Street institutions, while the other person fell completely and blindly into a beautifully designed, deeply psychological financial trap? Welcome to FinGraphy. I am Nat, your strategic director, and today I am going to respectfully reveal the absolute unfiltered truth about the greatest and most violent wealth transfer in modern human history. There is a brutal, entirely silent macroeconomic war happening right now for the absolute control of the new global monetary order. It is an epic, multi-trillion-dollar clash between physical gold, which is the ancient, unbreakable anchor of human civilization, and Bitcoin, the hyper-advanced, mathematically sound digital challenger of the 21st century. And if you do not deeply understand the hidden mechanics of this specific financial battlefield, you are practically guaranteed to end up exactly like the exhausted man in the coffee shop, slowly and painfully losing your purchasing power year after year until you have absolutely nothing left to pass down to your children. Let us begin this journey by completely shattering a massive, globally accepted illusion that you have been taught since you were a child. For the past 4 decades, the entire civilized world has operated under a completely artificial, highly manipulated financial architecture. To keep the grand, political illusion of endless, utopian economic growth alive, central banks and powerful politicians had to relentlessly print trillions upon trillions of fiat currency units entirely out of thin air. This reckless, unprecedented expansion of the global money supply created a massive, extremely unstable debt bubble that now threatens to swallow the entire world economy. The traditional fiat system heavily rewarded the people who blindly bought into the American stock market, and it severely, ruthlessly punished anyone who tried to safely save cash in a traditional bank account. To truly understand the gravity of this situation, we must briefly travel back in time to the year 1944, near the end of the Second World War. At a place called Bretton Woods, the victorious Allied nations gathered to design a brand new global financial system. They officially agreed that the American dollar would be the supreme global reserve currency, and to ensure trust, They promised that every single American dollar would be directly backed by physical gold held safely in government vaults. It was a hard, reliable, honest standard. If a foreign nation held American dollars, they could theoretically exchange them for physical gold at any time. This created an era of massive industrial growth and relative economic stability. But as the decades passed, politicians realized that a gold standard severely restricted their ability to spend money. They wanted to fund massive, incredibly expensive foreign wars, and they wanted to fund enormous domestic social programs to win political elections. Because they were restricted by the amount of physical gold in the vault, they secretly began printing far more paper dollars than they actually had gold to back up. Eventually, the rest of the world noticed this mathematical discrepancy, and foreign nations started aggressively demanding their physical gold back. This brings us to a terrifying moment in history. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and completely shocked the entire world. He officially and permanently severed the tie between the American dollar and physical gold. He transformed the dollar from a reliable, gold-backed receipt into a pure fiat currency. The word fiat translates to by decree, meaning the money only has value because the government forcefully says it has value, backed by absolutely nothing except the violently enforced promise of the state and the power of its military. From that exact moment forward, the invisible, highly destructive tax of inflation was fully unleashed upon the working class of the world. I need you to understand this deeply. Inflation is not a tragic accident. Inflation is not a mysterious force of nature. Inflation is a highly calculated, deeply intentional wealth transfer mechanism. It is systematically designed to slowly, invisibly drain the pure purchasing power from your hourly wages and funnel that value directly into the pockets of the asset-owning elite and the government itself. It allows governments to slowly default on their massive debts by paying them back with cheaper, degraded currency. Bitcoin was born directly out of the smoldering, chaotic ashes of the 2008 global financial crisis. When massive Wall Street banks gambled with the global economy and lost, the government recklessly bailed them out by printing trillions of new dollars, completely destroying the purchasing power of the middle class in the process. In response to this absolute corruption, a brilliant, anonymous programmer known as Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin protocol. It was a beautiful mathematical rebellion against this deeply corrupt, highly manipulative banking system. It was perfectly and elegantly designed to be the ultimate unhackable financial escape hatch for the common man. It is a completely decentralized, purely digital hard asset that is mathematically capped at exactly 21 million coins. No government, no central bank, and no corporation can ever print more of it. For a very long time, the dominant macroeconomic narrative surrounding Bitcoin was absolutely flawless. Millions of highly intelligent investors deeply believed that when the global fiat debt system inevitably began to heavily fracture and mathematically collapse, Bitcoin would violently rise up to become the supreme, undisputed safe haven asset of the entire world, permanently destroying the historical necessity of physical gold. But if we look closely at the terrifying, undeniable reality of the global markets today, that beautiful, optimistic story is violently colliding with a very different, much harsher institutional reality. Physical gold is currently exploding to magnificent, unprecedented all-time highs almost every single week, aggressively breaking past the $5,000 per ounce milestone. Central banks from massive, incredibly powerful nations all around the entire world are hoarding heavy physical gold bars at a frantic, highly aggressive pace that we have not witnessed since the absolute height of the Cold War. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has struggled immensely to break through its heavily guarded resistance levels, recently suffering a brutal drop of nearly 30% in a matter of weeks, and has actually lost significant, measurable value when directly compared against the absolute purchasing power of gold. To deeply and truly understand this highly confusing, immensely frustrating phenomenon, we have to meticulously analyze the global financial markets through two distinct, extremely powerful scientific lenses. The very first lens we must use is called the macro force. I want you to think of the macro force exactly like the sheer, unstoppable gravitational pull of a supermassive black hole at the center of a galaxy. It moves extremely slowly, almost imperceptibly from day to day, but its structural pull is absolutely absolute and entirely inescapable over the long term. Right now, the macro force is violently screaming that the entire global fiat debt system is fundamentally, mathematically, and permanently broken. Sovereign debt relative to the gross domestic product of almost every major developed nation is currently at catastrophic, completely unpayable levels. We are talking about nearly $39 trillion in debt for the United States alone, where the annual interest payments have now completely surpassed the entire United States defense budget. This is a debt that can never be paid back through normal economic taxation. Furthermore, deep, unresolvable geopolitical tensions are aggressively ripping the global manufacturing supply chains completely apart. Because of this terrifying, undeniable reality, sovereign nations, meaning the incredibly powerful countries that actually control massive standing armies, heavy industrial manufacturing, and global energy reserves, are deeply panicking behind closed doors. They have recently witnessed the weaponization of the American dollar. They saw that if a country disobeys the ruling empire, their treasury bonds and their fiat reserves can be instantly frozen, seized, or heavily sanctioned with the push of a button. They simply do not trust the traditional system anymore. They mathematically cannot risk having their national wealth erased by a foreign political power. So, what exactly do they do to survive this new, highly dangerous multipolar world? They aggressively and methodically pivot to the only truly neutral, completely unprintable, universally recognized financial asset on planet Earth, which is physical gold. This massive, incredibly slow-moving, multi-trillion-dollar institutional gravity is exactly what is violently driving the price of gold into the absolute stratosphere. The smart money, the ancient money, the money that controls the destiny of entire nations, is urgently seeking the ultimate, untouchable shelter. They are demanding physical delivery of gold bars, completely draining the Western vaults and moving the wealth to the East. But if the overarching macro environment is so perfectly and beautifully aligned for hard, scarce assets to thrive, then why exactly is Bitcoin violently struggling to keep up the pace? This brings us directly to our second analytical lens, the technical force. I want you to think of the technical force exactly like the chaotic, highly unpredictable, entirely volatile realm of quantum mechanics. It strictly dictates the violent, stomach-churning, day-to-day and week-to-week volatility of the global cryptocurrency markets. Historically speaking, since its very inception, Bitcoin has religiously followed a very strict, mathematically programmed 4-year cycle, which is entirely driven by its algorithmic halving events. A halving event is when the amount of new Bitcoin being created every 10 minutes is instantly cut in half, massively restricting the new supply. Because of this, Bitcoin usually reaches a massive, euphoric retail peak in the fourth quarter of the post-halving year, and then it inevitably and violently crashes into a brutal, depressing, year-long bear market that completely ruins over-leveraged, emotional investors. When we carefully and objectively analyze the long-term technical charts, the absolute most critical, life-or-death battleground for Bitcoin is always the 50-week moving average. The 50-week moving average represents roughly one entire year of institutional price history. It is the line in the sand between a raging bull market and a devastating bear market. When the price of Bitcoin weekly falls and heavily closes below this absolutely vital line for multiple consecutive weeks, it historically triggers a massive, unstoppable cascade of institutional liquidation events. This heavy, relentless selling pressure ruthlessly drags the price all the way down into the dark abyss until it violently collides with the ultimate foundation, which is the 200-week moving average. The 200-week line represents 4 entire years of price data, essentially mapping an entire halving cycle. It has historically served as the absolute, unbreakable concrete floor of the entire digital market. Right now, as we speak, the sheer technical gravity is aggressively pulling Bitcoin down toward these lower levels, ruthlessly flushing out the weak hands, the emotional tourists, and the heavily over-leveraged gamblers who foolishly thought they could outsmart the mathematical realities of the market. But my friends, there is a much darker, far more dangerous, and deeply hidden reason why Bitcoin is currently struggling while physical gold absolutely soars to the heavens. And this is the ultimate terrifying secret that Wall Street absolutely, positively does not want you to ever understand. It is a concept called massive financialization and paper suppression. Just a few short months ago, The entire global cryptocurrency community loudly celebrated and cheered when the major traditional financial institutions finally launched the spot ETFs. Everyone was incredibly euphoric because they genuinely, innocently thought that Wall Street was finally validating the genius of Bitcoin. They thought the massive institutions were finally surrendering to the decentralized revolution. But the harsh, brutal reality of the situation is that the Wall Street ETFs were never a validation of the asset. They were a carefully constructed, highly weaponized Trojan horse designed to capture it. By aggressively pushing retail investors into these convenient paper products, Wall Street effectively and completely captured the pure, organic price discovery mechanism of the entire Bitcoin network. Today, the once pristine, highly rebellious digital asset is heavily wrapped, suffocated, and deeply trapped inside complex financial derivatives, massive institutional collateral loans, and highly leveraged paper trading desks. The big, powerful banks are currently and aggressively suppressing the true, organic value of Bitcoin by utilizing nearly infinite amounts of freshly printed fiat cash and complex paper contracts. Let me explain exactly how this sinister mechanism works, because they are running the exact same manipulative playbook that they ruthlessly executed against the physical gold market back in the early 2000s. When an investor buys a paper derivative instead of the actual self-custodied asset, the financial institution does not always have to hold a one-to-one ratio of the real asset. They use a completely legal but highly dangerous practice called rehypothecation. This means they can take one single real Bitcoin or one single real gold bar and legally sell multiple paper claims on that exact same asset to different investors. This artificially inflates the supply of the asset on paper, completely destroying the mathematical scarcity that gave the asset its value in the first place. They are systematically and deliberately creating massive price volatility in the digital markets to violently shake out the fearful retail investors, heavily triggering their emotional stop losses, purely so the massive institutions can quietly accumulate the real, underlying digital asset at a massive, generational discount. They want to own the real thing while forcing you to hold the paper illusion. We are currently witnessing the terrifying, highly volatile early stages of a generational capital rotation event. A true capital rotation happens when massive, unimaginable oceans of institutional wealth completely and permanently abandon one dying, overvalued asset class and violently flood into another heavily undervalued asset class. We have absolutely seen this exact phenomenon happen before in modern history, and it is crucial that we study these events so we do not repeat the tragic mistakes of the past. Let us look back at the terrifying events of 1933. During the absolute depths of the Great Depression, the American government realized they were completely bankrupt. To save themselves, they issued Executive Order 6102, which literally made it illegal for ordinary citizens to own physical gold. They forced the public to hand over their gold in exchange for paper dollars, and then immediately devalued the paper dollars, instantly destroying the wealth of the middle class while massively enriching the state. Decades later, during the catastrophic, heavily destructive stagflation of the 1970s, the traditional stock market was completely and utterly dead. It went totally sideways in a highly volatile, completely unprofitable range for a miserable 10 years. Imagine investing your money, waiting an entire decade, and making absolutely zero profit while the cost of living doubles. But during that exact same decade of immense economic suffering, the price of physical gold violently exploded by over 2,000%, completely enriching anyone who held it outside of the banking system. The exact same wealth-shifting dynamic happened yet again immediately after the massive dot-com technology bubble violently burst in the year 2000, sending capital fleeing into commodities for an entire decade. Today, if you look at the macroeconomic charts, almost every single major financial metric, from the S&P 500 to the mighty fiat dollar itself, is actively and consistently losing pure purchasing power when accurately priced in ounces of gold. The big institutional money is quietly, desperately, and systematically rotating straight out of the grand illusion of the fiat credit system and heavily anchoring itself into the absolute, undeniable reality of hard, scarce, unprintable commodities. This brings us to a fundamentally crucial concept that you must master if you want to survive. The single greatest danger you face right now, in this exact moment, is falling directly into the psychological trap of nominal gains versus real losses. Let me explain this illusion very clearly, because it is the exact trap that destroyed the first man in our coffee shop story. You might excitedly log into your online brokerage account today and happily see that your favorite technology stocks are up by a solid 10% for the year. You feel incredibly smart, you feel like a financial genius. You might even go out and celebrate. But if the central government recklessly prints so much new money that the real, actual cost of your housing, your daily energy, and your basic food goes up by a massive 15%, you have not actually made any money at all. You have actually suffered a devastating, invisible 5% loss in your true purchasing power. But the tragedy gets even worse, because the government will actually heavily tax you on that fake 10% nominal gain. So you lose purchasing power to inflation, and then you lose even more capital to taxes on phantom profits. This is the absolute silent, highly effective, completely invisible theft of the fiat system. It acts exactly like the boiling frog analogy. If you throw a frog into boiling water, it will jump out immediately. But if you put a frog in comfortable water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog will stay there until it is completely cooked alive. Inflation is the heat, and the middle class is the frog. So, as we reach the conclusion of this massive deep dive, the most important question remains. How do you actually become the highly successful, deeply relaxed, financially free investor from our coffee shop story? How do you practically survive, and more importantly, massively thrive in this highly hostile, deeply manipulative macroeconomic environment? You absolutely must build an unbreakable, multi-layered portfolio architecture. You cannot rely on the old rules, because the old rules have been completely destroyed. First, do not let pure panic or media-engineered fear control your decisions. Do not panic sell your strictly self-custodied Bitcoin just because Wall Street is heavily manipulating the short-term paper price. The absolute mathematical truth of its 21 million scarcity will eventually and violently break the artificial paper suppression. It is a mathematical inevitability. However, you must absolutely hold your own private keys. If you leave your digital assets on an exchange or in a paper ETF, you do not own them. You are just another creditor in a bankrupt system. Furthermore, in addition to that, you must deeply respect and heavily acknowledge the immense, unstoppable macro gravity of physical gold. You need to strategically hold true, verifiable physical assets outside of the banking system. You must also own incredibly strong, highly reliable cash-flowing dividend companies or income-producing real estate that can easily survive a decade of zero economic growth and high inflation. And most importantly, you must completely and aggressively eliminate absolutely all of your high-interest consumer debt. Debt is a chain that ties you to a sinking ship. You must boldly step outside the daily noise of the mainstream media, completely ignore the engineered daily panic, and strategically position your capital for the greatest, most violent wealth transfer of our entire lifetime. The rotation has already begun, and the only question is whether you will be crushed by it or whether you will ride the wave to absolute financial freedom. Thank you so deeply for joining me today on this massive documentary deep dive on FinGraphy. Stay incredibly vigilant, stay deeply disciplined, protect your family, and I will see you in the very next strategic update.